Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study for Genesis 4. Right off the bat, I sure thought as I was pumping up some gas here, that's what it takes, about $17.48, about 17 and a half bucks to fill this tank up. And it'll last, it's a big tank, so it'll last about 220 miles. No, I can actually get out to 250 if I try. And we're off. So I was thinking, you know, if it's true, all the Bible, everything in the Bible, and mainly the overarching story, you know, the fact of God and His request, or His pathway to salvation, then I think I'm just digging myself a deeper hole with every day that I do this, because I think somewhere in there, I don't know whether it's actually in the Bible or something that simply Bible scholars say, but you'll be held accountable after death for the degree to which you knew the word and then rejected it. So can you imagine how much worse things are going to be if I spend however many months or years it takes to go through the entire Bible, making a video on every chapter, and then still come out the other end as a non-believer. So they're probably going to have to dig down in some lower levels to find a place to put me in hell. I don't mean to be flippant or light with that. Well, I guess I do, because whoop, here we go, green. I was tucking in my jacket. I guess I do, because I don't believe the whole thing in the first place. But so, you know, in the back of my mind, it's like having multiple processes going on in a computer. In the back of my mind, there's a little process going, you're just making it worse. So, I guess so. So here we go. Let's go on to Genesis 4. Ooh, turn on the heated grips. I forgot to do that. So, I like what I did yesterday, if I do say so myself, insofar as going through the chapter and stopping to talk about it as I went. I think that worked out better than my other idea, which is to recount the whole chapter and then comment, look at the moon. Wow, can you see it just to the left of that Taco Bell building? That is by the way, that is the Taco Bell global headquarters. I live on the other side of that building. Have we got a red light, or are we clear? We are clear. Right there's Taco Bell. Ay caramba! Remember the Taco Bell Chihuahua? Let's see, I'm not going to be able to get ahead of this rock truck. Let's work this out first. I don't like being behind the rock trucks. They drop rocks. There we go. We're clear. Woohoo! So I'll do that. I'll go ahead and work my way through. Genesis 4. You know, I read it a couple of times. I read it in New International Version and King James, and I like the fact that it was a little clearer in the New International Version. For example, when way down near the end of the book, where one of Cain's descendants kills somebody else, and he says so very specifically in the New International Version that he did so because he killed a servant because the servant harmed him. It's not so clear. It's not so clear in the King James edition. It kind of says something about, you know, because of my hurt or something like that. You know, it's like, well, what if you got like a toothache and you killed your servant? So no, but New International did a better job, and that stood out to me. And I don't know why I'm starting with this, but that stood out. There's the moon. That really stood out to me as how if it's not clear, then you're liable to confusion, or well, what's worse than confusion is disinterest. And in fact, this chapter is the first chapter where that disinterest begins. If you don't understand something, I find when I'm reading other books, if I don't understand something and I can't or I don't make the pains to figure it out, I kind of stop, or I lose interest. Let me take a quick aside. When I first read Walden for the first time, you know, Henry David Thoreau's, you know, great treatment of his 2 years of solitary life out on Walden Pond, I was in high school, and I couldn't understand it because of the way that he wrote, and also the large vocabulary that he possessed, and the use of the words that he did. And I got halfway through economy, the first chapter, and I kind of gave up because it didn't make any sense. I couldn't get it. But there was something about it, and maybe that's the key. There was something about it that really intrigued me. So I decided to go back and try again, this time armed with a dictionary. I got myself a little, actually it wasn't little, it was quite large. I remember it had a red hard binding dictionary, and I would read Walden with the dictionary right next to it, and I made a point to look up every word I didn't understand and not to move forward until I had dissected every sentence. And I can thank whatever vocabulary I may have now to that exercise, because it allowed me. I read the whole book, and I looked up all the words, and that's when my mind was young and able to remember those words, and so I now have them at my disposal now. I can be thankful for that. So that was good. Now Thoreau's, the need for that can't be placed on Thoreau, because Thoreau was writing essentially for men and, I was going to say men and women, but largely men. Well, it was men and women too, of letters. He was a Harvard man after all, but Harvard was something different. For his age, right? So he was writing for the people of his time and using language that they would understand. I imagine one of his contemporaries, someone else who had also, had a similar level of education, or someone like Emerson, or other literary guys would have had no trouble understanding him. So the complexity was due to the fact that time has separated us from the writing style and the common language use of Thoreau's period, which was mid 19th century. So brings us back to a point I think I made in the first video, that a really good, or maybe it was the second, a really good author, if they wanted to make a timeless classic that could weather without requiring the support of a dictionary and a thesaurus and a 1,000 footnotes, they would be able to do so, I think. And in fact, okay, because I'm kind of coming back to the first point I wanted to make, because the consequence of that, if you don't do a good job of that, then what's going to happen if you don't, for example, and I'm not congratulating myself on the exercise of taking up the dictionary and moving forward, but if you don't do that with something, then you just put it on the side. You put the book aside and put it up on the shelf, or worse, you just pick it up on Sundays and carry it around with you without actually spending time going through the contents and distilling it out with all the supplemental resources that are required. Or the other option is that you say, to heck with it. Pastor Bob has already done all this work. I'll just let Pastor Bob do the heavy lifting, and just tell me on Sunday, or in special counsel, or on YouTube, or whatever venue Pastor Bob uses to dispense his interpretations, his impressions of these things. So, as long as I'm on that, and I'm sorry, I really haven't even started on chapter 4 yet, but as long as I'm on that, I wanted to comment on one other thing. So I'm imagining sometimes the objections that people might have to what I'm doing, and I imagine one objection might be, and I get this a lot. I got this a lot when I was in Japan and I was making videos for the Lyles Brother channel. People would say, "Kurt, you're thinking too much. You're spending too much time thinking about this stuff." And I was thinking, yeah, maybe I am. Maybe I should just read the Bible, read the chapter, and kind of open my heart and let whatever's out there come in. And then I thought, well, you know what? That's not what men and women of who are called to preach do. They literally do pick a chapter, pick a verse, and will spend a good deal of time between Sundays or between Saturdays, depending on your denomination, thinking about it and looking through scholarly text of other people who have thought about it, and then coming up with a sermon, an hour-long sermon. Maybe they'll take a chapter. They could probably easily do that with, well, look at the moon. Easily do that with anything in the first part of Genesis, and then speak on it. And that's the result of a long and lengthy process of reading and consideration. But then someone might say, well, then they're doing so under the guidance of the Lord. I have to confess, I don't have that, because I'm not asking for that. Well, I will. God, Lord, if you're out there, even though I'm a blasphemer, a sinner, and a non-believer, I would sure appreciate your guidance in going through this exercise to help me to understand things better. But then I'm given pause when I realize or I remember that all those believers that do that same exercise, they'll read the same chapter and come up with a different story. And these are the ones who are under the proper guidance. And then you'll say, well, then that's the result of Satan at work, confusing and deceiving, even the deceitful. And I would counter, does Satan really have that much power under those in this? Imagine a pastor in the sanctuary of the sacred ground of his or her church, under someone who believes and is requested guidance, and nevertheless Satan is at his or her shoulder, whispering lies. So I think I'm on pretty good footing if Satan has that much. No, I shouldn't say I'm on pretty good footing. I think if Satan has that much power, then I'm as subject to misapprehension and misinterpretation as anybody. So I might as well keep it up, and even if it means that they're going to have to get out a caterpillar excavator to dig a deeper layer in hell for me one day. That's okay. I'll go for it. So let's get on with it. I'm so dang long-winded. So chapter 4 is where we meet Cain and Abel. It's a story of Cain and Abel and a couple of other extra things. So Cain and Abel are the sons of Adam, who lives like over 900 years, but he has his first son like at 120. So I think that's enough time, maybe 120 years if they had, like, if it said it's his first son, I don't know, did it say that Cain was his first son, or was it Abel that was the first? Whichever one. Because clearly he and Eve were busy, because there's a whole bunch of other people around too. So because we're going to see Cain get pretty worried about other people killing him. So there's a backstory there. But so anyway, so Cain and Abel are doing their thing. Cain is a tiller of the ground. Abel is a tender of flocks, and they decide to have a sacrifice. So two things. One, where the heck did the idea of a sacrifice come from? And there's no commandment for sacrifice. And I get to point 2 in a second, but there's no commandment for no. God didn't say necessarily to have a sacrifice. At least it's not in any of the canonical text, because there's only like 4 chapters so far. So where did they get that idea to do that? So they started. Wasn't that kind of a weird idea just to come up with? So I think clearly this is another indication of being human written. Sacrifice was a very common thing in the cultures of the Middle East at the time. So it's almost like watching TV on a Sunday. You don't need to say that people were watching TV Sunday. Everybody's watching TV on a Sunday in the modern world, right? Likewise, everybody must have been sacrificing. All the religions are doing it, right? So it goes without saying that people sacrifice. So interesting that where did they get that idea? I mean, otherwise, wouldn't that be kind of weird? It's just they're kind of wondering. Even God had never told them to do so, but nevertheless, they go ahead and I'm going to butcher up this animal and take out the fatty parts and make a barbecue. And on that subject of barbecue, what is it that God likes about barbecue? Because he's clearly more impressed with Abel's fleshy burnt offering than Cain's basket of fruit and veggies. What is it about that? Because that's a long thing coming, right? There's going to be burnt offerings right up through the Common Era when we even burning human beings. So that's interesting. So God's not so happy. He likes the smell of burnt meat rather than the look of a vegetable and fruits on a bowl, and he somehow clearly makes that evident to the two men. And Cain, I think rightly so, is a little bit sad. God notices this. Is why are you so sad? And he kind of responds, and God, this is where the moral of the story is. So if there was a nugget of a lesson in chapter 4, here it is right now, when God says, well, Cain, sorry, sin lays in wait for you at the door, and if you do what's good, then you will be fine. And if you adhere or hearken to evil, then you will have you. You must be master over it. So there's the nugget of the lesson. So Pastor Bob Pastor John, whatever is, Pastor Sally is going to come up with a 1-hour speech on Sunday on chapter 4 of the Bible, there's probably going to be that point right there. You're resisting sin. And Cain clearly doesn't resist sin because he kills Abel out in the field. And we don't really know what he did with the body, but clearly it was a violent murder, because it was a bloody one, because the blood's in the ground. Or maybe just God was speaking figuratively, because that's a beautiful bit of literature there, when the blood speaks to me. God says, your brother's blood speaks to me. So anyway, God shows up and asks Cain after Abel, and we get the famous, am I my brother's keeper? On that point, so clearly, at the point that he's saying, am I my brother's keeper, clearly Cain knows that murder is not a good thing, because he's covering up the fact, right? And he knows he's done something wrong. But there is no commandment at that point, thou shalt not kill. So I think a believer would probably say that it's written on our hearts. And then I would wonder, well, if it's written on our hearts, then why does it need to be a commandment? Why doesn't God just refer to the encoded instructions that I've downloaded, I've uploaded into each one of you? It's a curious thing. So no explicit "thou shalt not kill," yet he seems to know that, or no explicit "thou shalt offer sacrifice." And by the way, I like burnt offerings better than floral decoration or veggie decorations. So God knows what's up. He can hear the blood speaking, and he's really pissed. And he lays down a curse. And at first I wasn't sure if the curse was, one of these hereditary curses, forever, like original sin, or if it was just a curse upon Cain. And I've kind of come to, after reading it a couple of times, I've kind of come to the idea that it was just upon Cain. And the curse was that basically you will work the earth, but it won't yield. Two parts. It won't yield anything for you anymore. Furthermore, you're cursed to walk the earth. And I don't know if that's because he can't be a farmer anymore, that he needs to walk around begging or something like that, but or he just has to keep moving. He has some initiative that moves him forward. Anyway, Cain's really, really unhappy about this, and he's really worried, because he says, and at first I'm wondering, why is he so unhappy? Why doesn't he just take up sheep herding? There's a whole flock that needs a shepherd. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but I mean, I just saw lightning. Wow. There's worse things that have happened, right? Stranger things have happened. Kill your brother and take over his business. I think that's a whoa, I'll let you in, guy. Here you go. That's a literary theme. So I'll get to that in just a second too. I'm glad that said that, because that reminds me of something I wanted to say. I'll say that next. So off Cain goes to wander the earth, but before he goes, he says, and he's really upset. He's like, oh, this is really, really bad. Because anybody that I meet is going to kill me. The question I have there is, who the hell is Skyrim? Who the heck is he going to meet? I mean, so far we just know that there's Cain and Abel. Anybody out there is going to be his immediate brothers and sisters, right? I mean, or at least nieces and nephews, maybe first one or two removed. I mean, hi. I mean, anybody at that time, anybody you meet is, hey cousin. Oh, but anyway, clearly the earth is peopled with a lot of people. Adam and Eve must have been very busy, and their descendants as well, and there's a lot of folks, which is no surprise, because we see that same activity later after the flood, when I think within 150 years of the Great Flood, the Egyptians are building the dang pyramids. So if you kind of go to the chronological timeline of the biblical timeline and match that up with the Egyptian timeline, so clearly after Noah, within 3 or 4 generations, or back then, one generation, those guys lived to be 900. Less than that, a tenth of a generation, they've got enough people around to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. So I guess it can be done. So anyway, so God says, oh yeah, you're right, so they're going to do that. So I'm going to lay a curse upon anybody that kills you. They will be repaid 7-fold. So I guess that means you're going to be killed 7 times, or they're going to kill 7. If you kill Cain, you and 6 of your siblings and brothers and family are going to get killed. I don't know what that means. How do you lay the death penalty 7 times? Well, we do that, don't we? We can give death penalty 7 times, but I like to see you try to carry that out. But he's God, I guess he can. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful. It just comes out. So So then off Cain goes and starts, and then begins a little story of, Cain begat. This is where the first instance of our begats. Cain begat his son, who begat his son, who begat his son, out to I think it's 6 generations out. So the son really got a little lineage going on, and then it comes down to Cain's, like great grandson has like 3 sons. One of them's is the father of everybody who lives in tents and herds sheep, which must be everybody in the world right at that time. Another one is a forger of metals, and another one does something else, and it's a curious little side thing. And then suddenly we're back to Adam and Eve, who get busy again, and it's interesting to read in the 2 versions. In King James edition, it's Adam knew his wife again, and in the New International Version, it's Adam made love to his wife again. And I'm like, I got to confess to blushing a little bit when I read that. I was like, made love, ooh, well, that's in the Bible. So so interesting. So we know exactly what happened. So Eve gives birth to another son, Seth, who she says, the Lord has given me another man to replace my lost son, Abel. Now, what is so big about Seth? Because in all that time, especially given the fact that how many people were running around at that time, they must have had a lot of kids. So something about Seth must be real important, but we don't get anything on that except something Seth goes on to say. I think he says something with talks to his wife, or he's got 2 wives or something like that, and something about that. And suddenly at the end of that maybe it's at the end of all the begets, there's an interesting note that, and then one of them had a sister, and his sister's name was something or other, and I'm like, where did that come from? Just suddenly mentioned his sister. Anyway, you see what I mean? It kind of goes all over there, and then suddenly it ends with saying, and this began the age when men began to, what was the word, worship or recognize God. So I was exasperated, and a couple of thoughts after I'd read it. One was that if you're the type, like I said before, that's not going to be laboring hard to figure out what these things mean, this is the beginning of the end for you in terms of reading the Bible. I know that when I've tried to read the Bible many times in the past, and didn't get much further, well, you can jump around. Everybody, Christians will always say, jump up to the New Testament, get you some Gospels up there. That's important. I can understand why, because that's where the story really begins for them. And I would admit it is easier. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are much easier to read than Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, all that kind of stuff. Numbers, especially. Oh my gosh! But if you don't do that, then you're going to start. This is the beginning of the end. You kind of finish chapter 4. You're like, ho hum, yeah. No, that was kind of what was the point? The point. And then Pastor Bob on Sunday says the point was to watch for sin crouching at the door, that if you don't resist it, that it'll have the best of you, just like it had the best of Cain. Okay, great. Well, why did I have to read this whole chapter? Why didn't I just let you tell me that? And that's what starts to happen. At least when I was a Christian, that's what I did. I didn't bother to read it. I just, wonder what Pastor Bob's got for us today. And he'll ask you to open your book and go to Genesis chapter 4, verse 6. We're going to study today how God admonishes Cain to watch out for sin crouching at the door. Oh, okay, there's the lesson. Okay, so the last thought before I finish up, I had a humorous image in my head after all of this. I was picturing I had a really good English teacher in high school, so a teacher who really cared and took the time to read my essays and all of our essays and write up good comments and actually sit with us and talk with us. I mean, actually spend their time, lunchtime, to talk to us about our writing lessons. It was a really, dare I say, a blessing. I really appreciated that teacher. I wish I could remember the teacher's name. It wasn't the teacher that introduced me to Thoreau. That was a different one. I was lucky to have a couple of teachers like that. Anyway, I remember this teacher would sit with me and point out to me first comment, favorably on point out the good parts of my essays, and then point out what was wrong, or where it could be better. Not wrong, but where it could be better. And I was trying to imagine Yahweh, God, it's a 16-year-old. Maybe it was, I don't remember how old I was, 16, 17, something, I don't remember which year, sitting with that same teacher in that English class. And Yahweh's got his essay, which is, book 4 of Genesis. Now, of course, he's not going to write it, but he's got an outline for it, right? He says, I'm going to inspire some guy or some guys to write this thing. And so my English teacher's looking at it and going, okay, wow. Okay, see, it opens with some conflict. You've got Cain and Abel, and oh, wow, you've got a murder right off the bat. Oh, I see. Oh, look at that. You've got you've got a moral to the story, a reason for it. So that's being told, in terms of the lesson of watching for sin. And then I see where this is going, in some nice language. You could use with a little character development. I mean, one thing that's nice is Yahweh is to put some meat on the bones of your characters. So, and that's important. And any good English teacher will tell you, hey. Any good English teacher would tell you, you were my brother. No, they won't say that. That's just he's an adventure writer. So we're all brothers, adventure writers. Any good English teacher would tell you that the way to help a reader continue in the story is if they feel connected in some way to the character, and we can do that by doing character development. And there's absolutely no character development with Cain, Abel, Adam and Eve. Nobody. I mean, we know next to nothing of them, and so we're not really that connected. We don't want to carry on to the next chapter to see what happens, because we care if we get to know somebody a little bit better. It's just a part of it. So the English teacher points that out and says, maybe a little character development. This Cain guy, his weaknesses, his interests. Maybe he's a good guy at heart, but he's sad because the father-like figure of God has kind of given him the thumbs down on his offering. But then right into this begins the begats, and I'm sure my English teacher would have said, well, what's up with this? And Yahweh's probably going to say, well, that's just how we roll. That's just, I mean, in an age of oral tradition where we don't really write things down. Most people are illiterate. You give context to things by pointing out that, I'm not just Kurt. I'm Kurt, son of Alan. Son of Alan, also known as Grizzly of Upland, formerly of Lameda. And you do that, and who begatting, Glenn begat Alan, who begat Kurt, who begat, well, I would say begat Emily, but she's a girl, so you don't get a lot of girls in the begats. Okay, so that makes sense. So my English teacher would say, yeah, okay, I get it. So it's a Hebrew thing, right? Okay, so it'll make sense to the readers of the time. And then to suddenly point out, so my teacher would say, so what's up with the 3 dudes at the end with their specialities of sheep herding, living in tents, working iron, and whatever the other one was. And God just kind of, yeah, right. Probably sitting there, got his arms folded about now, not taking any notes. After all, think of who he is, right? Who's this English teacher to be talking to him like this? And to suddenly end with, thus begins the period when people began, worshiping or whatever, recognizing the Lord. Well, the English teacher will probably say, well, wasn't that what the whole start of the story was? Wasn't that what the offerings were about? Weren't they recognizing and worshiping the Lord? And I may be getting that word wrong about what they were doing there at the end. So anyway, the English teacher has kind of pointed out that you got a good idea here. You got some conflict. You got a moral to the story. Could use a little character development. Watch out on running off on side tangents that may not make sense unless you're going to pick that up later. You never know. And what's this thing that the teacher might say? Something about it. You put a mark on Cain. Ooh, that's a good thing. A mark on him so that nobody would kill him. That's a good thing. But what about this mark? Oh, no, don't tell me. I'm sure that's going to come up later, right? Because Cain survives. And then another one was mentioned there's this other guy, 4 generations down from Cain that accidentally killed his servant who hurt him. And he said, And he said, if vengeance upon Cain for killing him was sevenfold, then mine will be 7 and 70-fold. Well, who is he to say that? What authority does he get? He sounds like an interesting guy. I hope we get to see more of him. I don't think we do. At that point, Yahweh is probably had enough. You know, he's probably sitting up straight, and well, thank you for the advice, Mr. Dean, whatever his name, I can't remember that teacher's name, sadly. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'll see you tomorrow for 4th period. Or maybe not. Or maybe not. That would be the end. So there we go. Chapter 4 of Genesis. Cain and Abel. The watching out for sin. Thank you for joining me on Freeway Bible Study for today. Tomorrow, chapter 5, and we'll see what happens next. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.